£29.3 billion. That's how much British workers are losing each year to a tax rise nobody voted for and nobody called a tax rise. But few people know this began with a single decision, buried in a budget speech on the 3rd of March, 2021. Rishi Sunak stood at the dispatch box and announced the personal allowance would be frozen. Not cut, not raised, just frozen. Nobody called it a heist, but that one sentence has already extracted more money from British workers than any tax increase this century. 3.2 million people who never used to pay income tax now pay it. Shop workers, apprentices, pensioners, dragged across the threshold not because they earned more, but because the government refused to move the line. 2.1 million more people have been pulled into the 40% rate, a 47% increase in higher rate taxpayers. Nurses, police officers, senior engineers, people who never thought of themselves as rich, now paying 40 pence on every pound they earn above £50,270. This is not a tax on wealth. This is a tax on work. And it was designed to be invisible. For decades, the British tax system operated on a simple principle. As prices rose, tax thresholds rose with them. The personal allowance, the amount workers can earn before paying a single penny, was supposed to track inflation. If everything costs 5% more, the tax-free allowance goes up 5%, so nobody pays tax just to stand still. The higher rate threshold did the same. £50,270 was designed to catch the genuinely well-off, not the moderately comfortable, not the teacher with 20 years of experience, not the nurse doing overtime. The system had a logic, a promise. Workers only paid more tax when they were genuinely better off. But on the 3rd of March, 2021, that promise was quietly broken. What Sunak announced sounded technical. Personal allowance, frozen at £12,570. Higher rate threshold, frozen at £50,270. Not forever, just 4 years. Temporary while the economy recovered. At the time, inflation was 0.7%. The freeze barely mattered. Nobody noticed. But here's how the machine works. Take a worker earning £35,000. In 2021, they paid basic rate tax on £22,430, roughly £4,486. Now it's 2026. They've had a few pay rises, nothing dramatic, just keeping up. They earn £40,000. Their personal allowance is still £12,570. Now they're paying tax on £27,430. That's £5,486. A 14% pay rise, an income tax bill that went up 22%. That gap between what was earned and what was kept is fiscal drag. Every pay rise pushes more income above frozen thresholds. The government doesn't raise the rate, it just refuses to move the line. But the 4-year freeze was never going to be enough. November 2022, Jeremy Hunt at the same dispatch box. Inflation was 11.1%. Energy bills had doubled. And Hunt extended the freeze 2 more years. Then the Treasury pushed it further to 2030. A temporary measure became a decade-long policy. In 2021, someone earning £50,000 was nowhere near the 40% rate. Today, with modest pay rises, they're brushing against it. By 2028, the OBR estimates that a nurse on £54,000, Band 8A, 15 years into her career, will be paying 40% tax on part of her income. A higher rate taxpayer, a nurse. The OBR calculates this freeze will extract £29.3 billion a year from British workers by 2027 to 28. That's 1% of the entire UK economy. That's more than the government spends on policing, courts and prisons combined. It is equivalent to adding 4 pence to the basic rate of income tax. If a Chancellor stood up and announced a 4 pence tax rise, the country would be in uproar. But because it was done through a freeze, not a vote, not a headline, it sailed through and it hits middle earners hardest. The very wealthy don't notice. Their income comes from capital, from dividends, from assets. The very poor are protected by the personal allowance. But the nurse, the teacher, the engineer, the police sergeant, they're the ones paying for it. Sarah is a secondary school teacher in Manchester, 12 years in the classroom. In 2021, she earned £43,000. She felt like she was slowly getting ahead. 5 years later, Sarah earns £51,000. She took a head of department role, but now, roughly £730 of her income is taxed at 40%. She's a higher rate taxpayer. She didn't move house. She didn't change her lifestyle. She just got promoted. Sarah did everything she was supposed to do. She worked harder. She took more responsibility. She earned more. And the government took a larger slice, not by raising her taxes, but by refusing to move the line. There are 2.1 million Sarahs in Britain today. Sunak is no longer Prime Minister. Hunt is no longer Chancellor. They wrote their memoirs and gave their speeches. But the machine they built is still running. When Rachel Reeves entered number 11, she did not undo the freeze. She extended it, quietly, buried in the small print, all the way to 2030. By the time it ends, the personal allowance will have the real value it had in 2013. 2 decades of inflation erased from the tax code. The architects have changed, the architecture remains. And fiscal drag is not the only stealth tax eating into your money right now. Your ISA allowance, £20,000, hasn't been raised since 2017. In real terms, it's now worth less than £15,000. The government hasn't cut it. It's just let inflation shrink it. Your council tax band is being revalued. Millions of households will jump 1 or 2 bands without any improvement in services. The personal allowance, the ISA allowance, the council tax band, the higher rate threshold. None of these were voted on as tax rises, but together they represent the largest stealth tax extraction in modern British history. The playbook is the same every time. Freeze the threshold. Let inflation do the work. Never call it what it is. A tax rise should require a vote. A tax rise should require a debate. A tax rise should require a politician to stand before the public and say, this is what we're doing, this is why, and you can judge us at the ballot box. Fiscal drag requires none of that. It requires only the passage of time, and that is what makes it the most dangerous tax of all. Not the money it takes, but the fact that it takes it without ever having to ask. Subscribe to Inside the Money Machine. There will be many more stories like this.